The following program is a Town of Colony television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
The top of summer to you. I'm Joe Doolittle.
And I'm Kate Dudding.
And this is Story by Story.
Celebrating the human spirit.
And Kate and I are storytellers. And we're going to spend about an hour talking about story. We've got some wonderful examples of stories. And we have one of the Eastern Coast's best storytellers here, and authors and actors. So we've got a great show, don't we, Kate?
Yes, as always.
As always. But I'd like to always ask Kate what's the most interesting thing she's been doing, because she does a lot of interesting things.
Well, I'm getting ready to give a couple of talks on the Renoir exhibit that's going to be at the Clark Art Institute in Williamstown, Massachusetts this summer, opening on June 8th. And I found in a footnote of a book the reference to another book. And I got a copy of, I ordered it last Monday, and it came on Friday from France. It's in French, but I was a French major. So I've been using Google Docs to translate, and then with my dictionary to smooth it out. And
now, Kate, with this kind of topic and this kind of effort, is this going to make you into a French impressionist as well?
No, I just want to find out his own words. And a lot of art books are talking about how he does the painting and how he fits into art history. And I always want the artist's own words.
So you've gotten a primary source, as it is.
It was written by a friend of his, but the best thing was there were 2 interviews of him, and one of them had been translated from English into French, but once I had the notation of it, it was online. Scribner's Magazine, 1912.
Now, I need to ask you a question, because we've known each other a long time. We've been friends a long time now. Is this for some guerrilla storytelling, or are you going to do a formal program over there?
I don't know if it's going to be over there. I'm going to do it for the Academy for Lifelong Learning and for the Clifton Park Half Moon Library. And I'm not. So that information you'll be hearing about next month.
Now, do you want to just describe for people what guerrilla storytelling is?
It's like guerrilla warfare, only nicer. It's not the animal. I lurk by a painting, looking friendly, a little off to the side, and as other people come up, if they look receptive, just as they're leaving, I wait till, I don't interrupt, but just as they're beginning to turn, I go, I know a quick story about this painting. May I share it with you?
So you're kind
and they almost invariably say, sure.
So you're kind of like the Che Guevara of storytelling in art galleries.
Well, something like that.
It's a wonderful artistic approach, I might add.
It's sort of like a mime, a street mime, sort of popping out at you and involving you.
Well, I just want to tell you, I cannot top that diligence of research and expression. As a storyteller, I've had some accomplishments. I did a little preaching, and the minister I was preaching for asked me to do some things on mental health, which I've got some background in. And, that's kind of like describe a cake for me or something. So, but I used a story that went back to one of my visits to Colgate, where I went to school. And it resonated because people were still talking about it at coffee. And that's one of the good things about a story. If people are still rolling it over and it's still generating thoughts and conversations, then you've been engaged. And so that was that's my story.
And that's true of plays, too, which gets us to our guest. That I remember, I think my husband and I talked all the way home from Albany to Clifton Park, about half an hour, after we saw the play Doubt. And we're going, why was the Mother Superior upset? What could she have done? You know, and yeah.
Well, that can undoubtedly happen, and we were in Broadway. Kay and I were in New York on Broadway, but that's another story this month. We want to welcome today FranYardley. Fran is an old and dear friend and storyteller from the Adirondacks, from the area around Saranac Lake. She's accomplished in many things. She's accomplished as a storyteller, as an author, as a community activist.
As a renovator of an old camp in the Adirondacks, and I've forgotten how many hats she wore. There was logging, and there were Christmas trees, and there was maple syrup. Just little sidelines.
And all of the above. So we're going to have a conversation with Fran about a book from her youth called Finding True North. And FranYardley, it is such a pleasure to have you here in our studio today to talk about your story and yourself. And I just ripped off my microphone.
He's so excited.
I'm so excited.
He hasn't done that before, so that's really...
Welcome. And, you know, I know you as a storyteller, and I know of you as an actor. I should say that I was prepared to really be impressed and enjoy your book. But all I got to say is, wow, wow. Because the book really takes us back to Fran's early married life at a time when I can hardly remember the phone number that I enjoy today on my cell phone. So I'm awed at some of the detail that came out. But it was an inspired work that's been with you a long time.
And it's called Finding True North.
And give us a little story about the book in terms of how it finally came to paper.
Okay. Well, first, Kate and Joe, thank you so much for having me with you today. It's just a pleasure to be with you and everybody out there. And thanks for wanting to talk about this book, because I feel like this is my baby that grew up, and she's gone off. She went to college, and now she's off in the world. And how it came to be. Well, I've lived where I live for 52 years now, and so this is the story of this place where I live, and my story of being there, and also going back to the history, going back to 1854, of all the people who came here to the same place in the Adirondacks to do what they did. So it's those stories woven in and among. And how did it come to be? My kids had grown up, and there I was, and I thought, I'd love to tell the history of the Bartlett Carey Club, which was the name of the resort that my husband Jay Yardley and I renovated. And so I thought I was just going to tell this history, and that's what I did for a while. I actually researched for 2 years before I did any writing at all. And when I started writing, it was just going to be the history of the Adirondacks and the history of this place. And as I'm doing the research, I realized I was apparently not the first person to ever want to do the research for the history of the Adirondacks, and I couldn't begin to do that. It was just this huge subject, and what I wanted to do was really this big. So I started focusing on this, and after 2 more years, and there's a lot of stories about that, but after 2 years, I realized that I really needed to bring myself into the story. It couldn't just be about the history. And I'm very glad I got pushed by a couple of people into at least trying to do that, because it rounds the book out. So it's not just a history, it's a memoir history of this place.
And your story is woven in throughout. And your first husband's stories.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And I'm struck by the opening part of the book, because it really hooks you. The very attraction between you and Jay was the language of the Adirondacks.
Yes.
And because you're in a writing class, and he reads this excerpt from a piece he's working on that describes Bartlett Carey.
Right.
And you didn't even know him then, right?
No.
And so that one reference leads to romance, and leads to other things, and leads to him taking you with him to Bartlett Carey, to the middle of nowhere.
Well, it resonated very much with your summers growing up in Ontario.
Yes, it did,
in an similar outdoorsy. I'm a city town girl.
It really was deep pine tree forests and sparkling lakes. The only thing that the place in Canada that I grew up lacked was the mountains. So it was like one extra incredibly beautiful, wonderful thing.
And the issue of being there was your own, Jay, and your sense that you wanted to do something special in this place.
Yes, we wanted to renovate all the buildings, all 37 buildings, or find out which ones we couldn't renovate and get rid of them, and create a place like a summer resort, a place where families could come to, and it was going to be very much actually like it used to be way back in the 1850s when it was first developed. But that was our goal, was to do that.
And these buildings, you might be thinking, oh, cute little one room cottages.
Yeah.
And some of them were definitely not that.
No, some of them had 8 bedrooms and 7 bathrooms when we started. And we ended up, and I tell about this in a story that I might tell to you guys today, but about ending up with 9 houses that we called lodges. And they were from anywhere from 2 to 5 bedrooms, and one of them had 3 fireplaces, kitchens, it was a really complete houses for a family to stay in. So they were completely self-sufficient when they came for 2 weeks or a month to stay.
So not 2 bunk beds and an outhouse. Not at all.
No, indoor plumbing, Kate, and electricity.
That resonates with me.
Well, the electricity was a intriguing thing for me, because somewhere along the way somebody had built a dam in the Saranac River and put in a DC generator.
Right.
So the complex generated its own power.
It did when we got there. That dam was actually put in probably in the 1850s for logging, because it would hold, it would create a holding area for logs before they sent them downstream, and that was the logging highway, was through the rivers and the lakes. But then, I'm not sure exactly when the powerhouse was built, but it was generating DC electricity until we got there and we changed it to AC. That all by itself is another story.
So before we get to your stories, I'd like to ask at least one more question. Are you a lifelong writer? Or, I mean, were you writing, like a lot of writers said, oh, well, I started writing as soon as I, learned how to, and every day, and I had,
Wow.
Or
well, I love the question, Kate, because when I first read it, are you a lifelong writer? And I feel like saying, not yet. But I was thinking about it, and in 8th grade, Mr. Chapin was our headmaster, and our Rosie O'Grady was our 8th grade teacher, and she left to get married. Rosie O'Grady. And so Mr. Chapin took over in the first day in the classroom. He's halfway through 8th grade. And he said, all right, from now on, every day, you will write a page and bring it in. And so, of course, we're looking like Joe's face right now, which is like, oh my God. And on what, Mr. Chapin? Anything you want. Anything you want. So we had to write a page a day, and then on Monday morning we had to have 3 pages for him. So that was the beginning, and I can't say I've been writing ever since, because it's been a definitely checkered career, but definitely
sporadic.
Yeah, sporadic is the way of putting it. But lately, yes, much more.
Lately, yes, because you trained as in college in drama
and English, actually,
and English.
Yeah.
And you've been an actor, and then you've been a storyteller,
right?
Which fit into your schedule better. But they're on the same spectrum. It's solo performer, and you write the stuff as well as.
But with storytelling, I don't write it. I try not to write anything.
Okay. Create it.
Create it.
Yes.
Yeah. But I would say that with those 3, the acting, the storytelling, and the writing, they all involve stories, and they all involve the imagination, and those and creation, and those things are what I think are most important to me.
Those are three pillars actually for both storytelling and life in a way.
Yeah,
It's
definitely,
pretty cool,
Joe.
Pretty cool.
Okay, so could we want to leave plenty of time for Fran's stories. So we've had a bit of an introduction. Could you share a story from the Adirondacks?
I will, yes. And the story I'm going to tell actually is a story that I write about in the book. And before I tell it, I just want to say it's so interesting to take something that is written, that I wrote for reading in a book, and now bring it out and have it be a story for telling. And so it's slightly different, but here it is. I want you to imagine a cabin, a small cabin, not in a city, not in a village, but in the middle of the woods, on a hill, looking over a lake. The nearest town is 11 miles away, and the nearest neighbor is 2 miles away, and there's no electricity. This is the cabin that Jay and I moved to in 1968 in the Adirondack Mountains, on 1,000 acres of land with 36 other buildings and a crumbling dam. We had come there to renovate this historic old summer resort with the hopes of having families eventually be able to come and visit and stay there during the summer. So that first winter, we got there in October, the end of October 1968. And by the end of December, I began to learn about a new kind of cold. We had one stretch where it was 30 below zero every night, and it never got to above zero during the day. It was bright sun every day, but it never got above zero. And I began to learn about a new kind of snow. And I'm from Buffalo, New York. You'd think I would know it all, but end of December, there was this one afternoon where these tiny little flakes started falling. And our neighbor, 2 miles up the road, Carl Hathaway, he said, those are the flakes you got to be careful for. The big fluffy ones, no problem, but these are going to accumulate. And he was right. Within 24 hours, we had 3 feet of snow on the ground, new snow. And I began to learn about a new kind of lonely. That snow that I mentioned, it was pristine around our cabin, and the only footprints that we usually saw were those of Jay's and mine. We were the only ones there. I had grown up in a puppy pile of 4 brothers and sisters and myself, and dogs and cats and horses and goats and the occasional hen or bunny rabbit hopping around. And it was constantly chaotic fun. And now here I was with my closest town 11 miles away and my closest neighbor 2 miles away. We got into town maybe once a week. And I was learning a new kind of lonely in this pristine snow. Well, my mother caught wind of our being there, of course. I mean, we would talk to her all the time and wrote letters. Yes, we wrote letters in those days. And she wanted to come up and see this place for herself. So in February, we planned a visit. Before she came, I sat at night with Jay in front of the fire one night, and between us was the kerosene lamp. And I said, Jay, where's Mom going to sleep? We don't have room for her in this cabin. He said, how about David's cabin? David had been Jay's really good friend growing up, and in this little enclave where our little cabin was, only 20 feet away, was another little cabin that David had stayed in when he came up to visit Jay in the summer. It wasn't insulated, but it was small, and it had a potbelly stove and a bed and a table and a bureau. That's about how big it was. So there was some hope for maybe having it be somewhat warm. And my mother was an intrepid traveler, so I thought she could handle it. So we got it ready. Jay got all the firewood he could to have the potbelly stove be prepared, and I looked around for every blanket I could find. I found 3 heavy wool Hudson Bay blankets, you know the kind, and 2 other blankets. And I found some curtains in a box, and I hung them up and put little knickknacks around the window. And the day came for Mom to arrive. I was so excited. I couldn't wait to see her. She was driving from Buffalo. I knew she wouldn't get there till the afternoon. And when she came around the corner and parked in front of our cabin, I put on my parka and my boots. It was above 0 that day. And I went outside, and when she got out of the car, it seemed like all was right with the world again. Because with her came this flood of memories of that puppy pile, chaotic childhood. And then she turned around and she reached in to get her blue and white cooler. Oh, good, she'd said she was going to bring dinner, and she did. And it was always the same, and I loved it. It was loin lamb chops, which we would cook under the broiler in our gas stove, and curried cream potatoes, which were her specialty, peas, and then for dessert, her signature butterscotch brownies that melted in your mouth. Well, we had that dinner, and then we sat around the fire talking about family, catching up on Buffalo news, and Jay and I telling about what we were going to take her to see the next day. And finally, it was time for bed. So I said, I'll go over with you, Mom, see if everything's okay. We had gone earlier, of course, and we had started up the potbelly stove, so when we got over there, it was quite toasty and warm. It was nice, and I shoved in as much more wood as I could and made sure Mom was all settled. And then I came back, and the next morning, I woke up. It was barely dawn. I looked at the thermometer. It was 10 below 0. I was so curious about how she had done during the night. So I put on all of the clothes I could find and my parka and my boots. I know this is repetitive about the parka and boots, but it's what we did. And I went outside, and my breath was just taken away with how cold it was. And when I stepped in the snow, it crinkled, it crackled, almost like I was stepping on potato chips. And I walked across the snow, and I saw on Mom's cabin that all of the windows were frosted white. I knocked on the door, no answer. I opened it. Good morning, Mom. And from that mound of blankets, I saw her head lift up. Her nose was a little red. It was not exactly warm inside anymore. And she said, good morning, dearie. I said, okay, stay there. I knew if I didn't say that, she would be out of the bed and out the door looking for firewood. Stay there. And I opened the potbelly stove, and there were some embers, and I stirred them up and put in more wood. And then I ran over, jumped on the bed, wrapped myself in a blanket. How was your night, Mom? Oh, dearie, that was the best night's sleep I've ever had. My mom always said this. When we gave her a gift, oh, this is the best present I've ever had. When we cooked her a meal, that's the best food I've ever had. And Christmas time, sitting around the Christmas table in our dining room with the red satin tablecloth we used every year, and the Christmas tree over in the corner. At some point, there would be a rare lull in the conversation, and then Mom would look over at the Christmas tree, and she would say, that is the best Christmas tree we've ever had. And you know, every time she said that, she believed it. So I believed it too. Well, we spent the next 2 days showing Mom around. That first morning, we all got in the Land Rover, and we drove. It took a mile driving, still on the 1,000 acres of land, to get to where all the buildings were that we wanted to renovate. And as we showed Mom the main lodge, 3 stories with broken windows and the shingles falling off and the door on its hinges kind of leaning, I looked at her eyes as they got kind of wide, And then we showed her the building with the roof caved in from too much snow a few years earlier. And her eyes got even wider. And I saw reflected in her face everything I had felt when I had first arrived there. Could we do this? And Mom said, do you have any help? And Jay said, yeah, we have a couple of guys helping, and we might be getting some more. Well, Mom stayed with us for 2 days. And we knew it wouldn't be any longer because my father always got very antsy after 2 days. And as a matter of fact, on the second afternoon, the phone rang, and it was Dad. And when Mom got on the phone, he said, Libby, where's my underwear? And we knew it was time for her to go home. So the next morning, Jay said goodbye, and he took off to go work in one of the buildings. And I helped Mom pack up and carried her empty cooler out to the car and her bag. And we had a big hug. And then she got in the car and she started driving down the dirt road. And as I watched her, I started waving. That's what we do in our family. We always wave when somebody goes, and we wave until they've disappeared. And as I was waving, I saw the window on her car go down and her hand come out in her arm, and she started waving. And we waved and we waved until she disappeared around the corner. And with her disappeared the memories of that puppy pile and that chaotic fun. And I was left in this silence and these tall, dark pine trees and a question. Would I be able to do this alone? So I turned to go into the cabin, and as I did, I happened to look down, and there in the pristine snow was the footprint of Jay from leaving that morning, and there were my footprints. And then there was another smaller footprint. My mom was small. And something about that footprint made me know that even though my mom had disappeared around that corner, that she was not gone from me. She would never be gone from me. And I would never be truly alone.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
I'm so sad that I didn't realize when I was reading your book, I should have been hearing your voice.
Yeah, that was. It was wonderful to hear your voice, and remember the story in the book, and the extra detail in the story.
Yeah.
Because that, and we were talking earlier about the difference between writing and storytelling, and in writing you don't wave. No, that's because that whole sense of emotion isn't in the book, but it is certainly the heart of the story in terms of the echo of your loving relationship with people. I mean, that was just great.
It's also true that in developing a story, and it was true in the book too, but we talk about the MIT of a story, which is the most important thing. And when I thought about the MIT of this particular story within the book, it just took on a whole new, bigger thing than when I had written it.
Yeah, well, you certainly hit a couple of MITs. I love the waking up your mom, and that's almost as good as the wave, actually. But it's just really great, really great.
Don't move.
I know, and she would have been out the door.
And the other echo of life for me was a line that a friend once shared with us when Jay's mom passed away. And she wasn't Christian, but she was spiritual. And she said, the Dakota have a phrase that says, to live in the hearts of those we leave behind is not to die. And I've kept that in many things because it so sums up the issue of the small footprint in the snow and your reaction to it. So that was just beautiful.
Oh, that's nice,
Just
John.
beautiful.
And there's
That's
an
lovely.
African saying that you don't completely die until there are no longer any people left on Earth that still remember you.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, what I was about to say was something about great joy, because you can have this conversation about these kind of memories and realize that when you're staying there alone, you've got the sense of hope and joy that's also there with Jay's footprints and your footprints. And that bespeaks kind of the Christopher Wren idea, the architect, that God, my time is now, when issues will rise to meet me that will not be put down.
Oh, nice.
And that's another, when I was reading the book and listening to you, the Bartlett Carey Club was one of those issues that was not going to be put down. It was going to have to be flourishing in some way.
Yeah.
And you've kind of
Yeah.
taken that on.
Joe, you reminded me too of the quote that I have at the beginning of the book by Eudora Welty. And she says, "A place that was ever lived in is like a fire that will not go out."
Oh, that was beautiful.
And
that is
isn't that a great, I mean, and because that more than anything speaks to me of what the MIT of that book is, because it is about telling the story of this place.
And all the people.
all the people, Kate, who loved it and who came back, the people who were there in the late 18 and early 1900s, and then everything they built went up in flames, and within 2 years they didn't go away, they rebuilt. You know, so that kept happening over and over. World wars and stock market crashes and another fire, and they're still coming back. And I kept asking myself the whole time writing the book was why?
I'm guessing because it was a pristine part of heaven on Earth that they wanted to live there.
Yeah. It's a good reason.
Is that what you think? Something like that?
I think it's many things. I think for different people, different things. But I think it's a combination of that incredible beauty, that uniqueness that is in the Adirondacks. Of course, it's in a lot of places, but definitely there. And then it's the experiences that you have. It's the hardships that you go through in the place. And you put your mark on the place. You know, your blood, sweat, and tears are there, as well as the joys that you have. So all of that, you know, you become more and more connected to this earth. And it's a very powerful aphrodisiac in a way, you know, makes you want to come back.
So it's time to talk about coming attractions, and Fran has 4 of hers. So if you would like to hear and meet Fran in real life, you can go to 4 different places in the Adirondacks, Brantingham.
That's actually, it's over near Watertown.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But in June, July, August, and September, and Westport, New York, Old Forge, New York, they're all New York, Brantingham, and Indian Lake at various places, and the one in Brantingham near Watertown, reservations are required.
Right. Can I say something about the one in Indian Lake?
Please do, on September 11th.
Yeah. This is actually an ongoing project that the librarian in Indian Lake started. She wrote a grant last year to buy a bunch of my books. And so starting this spring, she's been giving them out to whomever. And then they're meeting on a monthly basis to talk about the book, and I gave them some prompts, because my hope with them and with people who read my book is that they might be able to get in touch with their own stories about their special place, whatever it is, wherever it is. And so that's what these people are doing. Every month they're talking about what is it about, where is your special place, what's it like, why is it special, what are your stories around that place? And then I'm going to come in September, and we're going to I don't know what we're going to do. We're going to have a big hoopla about the whole thing.
So that would be worth showing up for. That would be
It'll be really interesting, don't you think? I
that
think
would
it's going to be
that'd
really
great.
interesting. Yeah.
So, discovering special places. I was thinking you were just going to say, oh, and the whole town's going to read it, and then they're going to talk about it and have events. But this is very, very much birthing, midwifing.
I
their
think so,
stories.
because then their stories, so it becomes, it's not about me, it's really about what does this evoke.
It's an example.
What does this evoke for them in their lives, and how can it be meaningful for them?
Excellent. So we'll be back to you and your other story.
Okay.
But in the meantime, this is something you can talk about. Joe has had First Tuesday Tales and Stuff, and it recently been First Monday Tales and Stuff, an open mic for storytelling, music, and spoken word. And now it's moving to its third location, and it is
Pinhead Susan's. And Schenectady is replete with very cozy and community-like brew pubs. And Pinhead Susan's is in Schenectady, and the name of the pub is itself a story. And you have to show up on that June 4th to learn about that if you don't know it.
or you can go to their website.
Well, yeah, but it's more fun to show up. And this is an open mic for spoken word and songs and poems, so it's not limited to storytelling. You're encouraged to arrive and be prepared to listen and to share. And unlike the Arthur's, which is closed, and Moon and River, this place serves beer. And I've always wanted to do this in a pub, so we're having open mic at Pinhead Susan's of the famous story and the great IPA.
So June 4th, the topic there is bitter/sweet, and the featured performers are Mary Murphy and Barbara Palumbo, who have both been guests on this show.
And it'll be fun.
It'll be fun. And then the Interfaith Story Circle of the capital of Troy, Albany, Troy, and Schenectady will be meeting on June 12th. So you can see Fran in Indian Lake, and on June 12th at Temple Israel in Albany will be Stories of Our Fathers. And all we know about your father is he couldn't find his underwear.
Yeah.
But there are other stories. And the feature teller there will be Sandy Schumann.
And Sandy Schumann's father was a storyteller.
Yes, indeed. Then, some members of, former and current members of Children at the Well will be at the Clearwater Festival, the Story Grove there, run by Jerry Burns and Barry Marshall, on Saturday, June 15th. Ada Hetko, Aya Osman, and Varun Mondeka. I think I got all those right. They're wonderful storytellers. Aya's the younger sister of
Kalafala.
who's
And
been
Omar.
here.
Yeah.
And that should be a wonderful time. As Story Grove is going the whole time during the Clearwater Festival, but Children at the Well will only be there on Saturday. But they have other fabulous storytellers filling up the rest of the time. Then we have our monthly meeting of the Story Circle of the Capital District, where people are invited to come and listen or to share works in progress. This is storytelling, not story reading. And there will be a discussion between 6:15 and 7 on creating a story from historical facts, which is just what happened to be what Fran did, but this was an idea that Bonnie and Sandy Schumann had come up with. And we'll be meeting, this kind of floats around like First Tuesdays does. It's going to be at the Washington Avenue branch, formerly known as the main branch of the Albany Public Library on Washington Avenue. So it's 6:15 to 9. 7 to 9 is story sharing, and the discussion is.
And there is a parking lot behind the library off of Washington Avenue, and as well as street parking on Washington Avenue. So be aware of that, and it's easy entrance right into the library from a back door.
Right, and you get in the elevator up one floor, and poof, walk out of the elevator, and there's the room. Then, as Fran will be. We tape ahead of time, so we're still in May, and Fran will be at Cafe Lena tonight for the storytelling open mic there. But you won't have the opportunity to see her because you're seeing this after the fact. So, but on June 25th, you'll be able to see Nancy Marie Payne there.
Yeah, great.
And she's another fabulous storyteller. We have such a wealth.
Great.
Well, Story Circle's been going on for over 30 years, and we've managed to learn things. Amazemundo. So it's the fourth Tuesday of every month, September to June. So it will take a hiatus over the summer. So get there on June 25th. Nancy will have around 30 minutes, and there'll be slots for about 8 other tellers. 10-minute stories. Janine is very strict. No reading. But the full cafe menu is available, including beer and wine.
That's right. They've got. That's worth showing up for. But Nancy Payne is worth showing up for
Yes,
too.
and she actually has an outdoor background for many years, and she continues to be an educator at Five Rivers Environmental Center in Delmar, Bethlehem, south of Albany. Then announcing our upcoming 13th season at Proctor's. We will have 5 word plays September through March with topics hope, turning points, kindness, sticky situations, and lemons to lemonade.
Aha.
And then our celebration will be on Sunday, November 17th at 3:30 in the GE Theater. And our topic there is mountains.
Mountains.
And I imagine
Ooh.
some of them will be metaphoric mountains. And finally, if you can't get to any of our storytelling events, or if you are sick of what's on television, go to our website, click on YouTube, and there you will get over 200 stories on demand. Most of them taped right here in the studio in Colony Town Library, the William Stanford. Not quite sure of what that is, middle initial. So those are the coming attractions, and we have about 18 minutes left, 17 minutes left.
So let's hear another story from
And
Fran.
then we can chit-chat. And
Because this story's not very tame. We don't know how long it's going to be.
it's a youngster.
Yes.
Tell on.
Thank you. And I guess this would fit under the sticky situations category, I think. So when Jay and I first moved to the Adirondacks in 1968, we began hearing about and learning about Virgil and Caroline Bartlett. These were names that went well back in the history of this piece of property. They were the first people that ever set foot that we know of. Of course, there were Native Americans before that, but who came to this same property in 1854. That's when they came. And when they came, they couldn't come by car. There were no roads. There were no automobiles. The river, the water was their highway. And they came from Saranac Lake 15 miles away, so they had to paddle or row upstream 15 miles before they could step out on the shore of the river right before it went up the rapids and up to Upper Saranac Lake. They wanted to build a place for sports, as they called them then, which were men usually, but men and women who wanted to go out hunting and fishing and just being out in the wilderness. And they wanted to have a place where they could come and spend the night and have good food. Caroline was a great cook. So that was their intention. But when they stepped on the shore in 1854, there were no buildings. They just looked at this forest of deep pine trees, virgin pine trees, huge pine trees, went up well over 100 feet, every one of them. And they knew that they would be sawing those down, literally sawing them with cross-cut saws or chopping them with axes to finally build the Sportsman's Lodge, Bartlett Sportsman's Lodge. Well, when Jay and I came, over 100 years later, in 1968, we had buildings. We had 37 buildings. None of them were the ones from Virgil and Caroline's day. They had long gone. But we did have these buildings, and we knew we needed to do something about renovating them, and we were not sure yet exactly what that would be. But as we looked at these buildings and we started thinking about which would we keep, which would we tear down, we were thinking, I know I was, and I'm sure Jay was, we never talked about it a lot out loud, but could we do this? If we put in all this time and effort and money, would it work? Would people want to come? And I'm sure Virgil and Caroline must have been wondering the same thing. I have no doubt of it. Well, fast forward 12 years to 1980, August 1980. We had made it work. We now had 9 houses. We had gotten rid of a lot of them, but we had 9 houses ranging in size from 2 to 5 bedrooms. We called them lodges, and each one was self-sufficient. Each one had a kitchen, a dining room, a fireplace, at least one fireplace, bathrooms, indoor plumbing, electricity. It was great. It was the works. And we had families that loved to come. They came back year after year, and they wanted to come when their other families that they'd met there came, because now their kids were friends. So during the summer months, it was just packed, and everyone was having a great time. Well, on this one day in August, it was a stormy day, a dark and stormy day, and it was raining. If you were here in Albany, New York today, I would say it's raining like today, only even harder, just torrential rain. And wind, not just a little breeze, but this wind just whipping around the trees. So it was quite a day. But Jay and I were up at the club, running around as we usually were, taking care of this and that. And at midday, we finally managed to find about a half hour that we could go home. We lived about half a mile away to have lunch. So we were having lunch when there was a rap on the door. It was Pete. Pete was our right-hand man, maintenance guy. He supplied the firewood. He took care of the grounds. He fixed things when they needed fixing. There he was at our screen door. Jay, you've got to come now. You know that pine tree right outside of Hemlock Lodge, the big one? It looks like it's going to fall, and it could fall right on the roof. Jay went to the phone. He called up Carl. He was our neighbor 2 miles up the road, and Carl was a caretaker up there, but also a woodsman. He knew a lot about trees and how to take them down in the right way. And Carl said, I'll be right there, and I'll bring Tom. Tom was his son-in-law, and Tom knew a lot about the woods as well. Jay and I got in the truck. We followed Pete and went right up to the club. And when we got out in the parking lot, I heard something. Now, you may have heard the wind in pine trees, a breeze going through them, that sighing or whispering sound. That wasn't what I was hearing. This was a howling, a real howling up in the trees, and I looked up and the wind was just whipping those top branches back and forth, and the whole trunks of these trees, they were just swaying back and forth. We ran over to Hemlock Lodge. It was one of our 9 lodges that we had. This was a little one. It just had 2 bedrooms. We had just finished renovating it about 3 years earlier. Jay had just built a new staircase going up to the porch and put in a kitchen, and I'd sewed all the curtains, and here was this pine tree that was about to fall on it. It also had a family that was staying in it, George and his wife. George was a scientist, and his wife and his kids and dogs, and they'd all managed to get out. They were out, but still inside was the mother and baby opossum that they had brought up with them, and we didn't dare let them go back in to get the opossums. We just had to hope they would be okay. So we ran up, and there was Hemlock Lodge, and 15 feet away, here was this tree, this pine tree. It was so big, that trunk, that 2 people standing on either side could barely touch their hands. And up about 20 feet, the pine tree, the trunk split into 2 trunks that went way up about 100 feet altogether. And each of those 2 trunks was about the size of one regular size tree. And at some point, no one knows exactly when, those two trunks that were like this down at the bottom, they started a crack into the main trunk. And now with the wind whipping the top, the crack was growing by the minute with the wind whipping up there. And they knew they had to do something. So Jay and Tom and Carl got into a huddle and started a quick talk about what they were going to do. Pete went to get the bulldozer, and then they got some ropes and tied them around the tree, and they began to winch the tree back and tie them to other trees so it wouldn't fall, they hoped, on Hemlock Lodge. They wanted to try to make sure that didn't happen, and they wanted to winch it away from these other buildings over here as well. And then Tom got a ladder, and he put it up against that big old craggy bark, and he started climbing up the ladder with a 3/4 inch rope coiled at his waist. He said, I had to get up there to stabilize the tree before we could cut it down. And he said when he climbed all the way to the top, by this time, by the way, all the guests from all of the lodges had heard of the commotion and come out. It's still pouring rain, nobody cared, and they're just watching this drama unfold. And there is Tom climbing up this ladder, and the wind is whipping, and they could see the tree swaying. Would the tree knock the ladder and Tom down? Would the wind whip him off? Would he make it? And he managed to get up there, and he said later, when I got up there and I was right by those two trunks, it was like a mouth opening and closing, opening and closing. And somehow he managed to get the rope around those two trunks to stabilize them before they could cut the tree down. And as he started down, this great sigh of relief from everyone watching. And meanwhile, Carl had been pacing off. He judged that tree about 100 feet. He paced off 100 feet, and he figured exactly where he wanted that tree to fall. So it would go between these other buildings and definitely away from Hemlock, and hopefully not hurt any building in its fall. And he stood about 100 feet off with his pipe in one hand and his axe in the other, and he said, yeah, she's going to fall right about here. Well, once all that was done, Carl and Tom started up their chainsaws, revved them up, and those chainsaws. Now, I don't know a lot about how to cut a tree down, but I know there's a way you can do it to hopefully make it go in a certain direction and not in another direction. Something about wedging, and I just don't know. But they knew, that's why they were there, and I was just watching. And so those chainsaws started screaming and whining, and it seemed to go on for the longest time. And every once in a while, one of the chainsaws would quit because they'd run out of gas, or another one would get stuck, and they'd have to figure out how to unstick it. And then they'd be screaming and whining, and then finally, the chainsaw stopped. Tom and Carl had done whatever they could do. And everybody watching looked up at that tree, and as if choreographed, they started backing up because the tree began to lean, just slightly at first, and it started to groan as it was leaning. And it leaned and it groaned, and it leaned and it groaned. And then the top branches started cracking against other branches as it hit it, and then finally, whomp! That tree landed on the ground. And every foot felt the reverberation of that fall. It had stopped raining, but quite a few people were wiping their eyes, not because of the rain. And then George's little girl, the one who'd been in Hemlock, she walked up to the tree, and with her little arms, she tried to hug it the best she could. And then others came up and laid their hands against the craggy bark of that tree. And then George, the scientist, said, let's go find out how old this tree was. We all thought that was a great idea, and we went over to the stump of this tree, this huge golden yellow stump with this pungent scent of pine sap coming up. And he started counting the rings with a lot of help from little fingers, so he had to start over a bunch of times. And finally he finished, he said, 126 years. That's how old this tree was. 126 years. That meant this tree started growing in 1854. The same year that Virgil and Caroline stepped out of their boat onto the shore on the hill below and looked up at that pine tree forest and thought about the building that they would build. Little did they know then that while they were standing there up on another hill, a little shoot was coming out of the humus and the soil, a little shoot that would grow for 126 years. And little did we know, as we stood there mourning the loss of this giant, smelling that pungent pine sap, and looking up at the gap in the sky where this tree had just stood. Little did we know what little shoot might be coming out of the ground right then somewhere else on the property, some little shoot that would grow and grow and grow. And who knew what story that tree would have to tell?
Whoa.
Whoa.
Whoa. Oh, man.
And that's just 2 stories from this book. Just 2.
Boy, you tied a lot of things together in that story. That was really remarkable. I mean, so much about the people who were visitors and living there in UNJ, and then the personality of the trees.
Yeah.
That was something else.
And the
That
hole
was really
in the
something else.
sky.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of wonderful images.
They just now do you write poetry at all?
I do, not a lot,
Not
but
a lot.
I do write some poetry.
Because sometimes in your cadence, it really is poetry, and it's really kind of fun to hear.
Thank you.
So we have less than 2 minutes. Is there any last thing you'd like to say about your book before we say goodbye to you?
Oh, I'm so happy it's out. I'm so glad she graduated and she's out in the world. And I love to hear people's stories, their own stories that are generated because of the book. Yeah.
Do you have another book in your battery or near your heart?
Yes.
Oh, you do? Oh, wonderful! Great. So we could have another show.
Tell us a little bit.
Oh, it's such a story, but it's a completely different thing. It is about my grandmother, who in the 1930s went to Japan to study Zen Buddhism, and she lived and studied in a Zen Buddhist monastery. And I've been to that monastery twice now, so there's a lot of mystery and a very interesting time in the mid
30s.
1930s in Japan.
A lot of change going on there. That's when the whole infrastructure changed.
Yep. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So thank you, Fran, so much for coming. Thank all of you for coming also.
And we hope to see you again at the same time and place. Here's to the story.
And here's to your stories, too.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons go